Hi, welcome back to Fresh Faces New Ideas. My name's David. If you're new to the channel or you want to keep up to date with all the videos I do and anything else that I say, please like and subscribe. Please follow me on Twitter at Faces Ideas. Now, this video we're just going to go over one segment of Tucker's hour-long meltdown about the George Floyd, about the Derek Chauvin trial. This is going to be directly his conversation with Candace Owens. They're going to say a lot of things. Almost everything that they say is wrong, or if it is correct, it's correct to a degree that they are not referencing to. So please, once again, please like and subscribe and enjoy this video. Tucker and Candace Owens. Now, I'm not going through all of Tucker's because pretty much everything he said during this hour was probably insane. But we're gonna go through him talking to Candace Owens, and because I like to preview these videos before I show them to you, so that if there's outside context that they're referring to, I can bring up the data to either inform or rebuke what they're saying. When I watched this, I had to get up and go away and take a minute because I wasn't sure if I was on the same planet anymore.
Owens is the host of Candace. We're happy to have her on tonight to assess what we're watching now. Candace Owens, you'd think in a country like ours, this is the most first world country that's ever been. You'd think the most civilized and the most just. Here you have to consider a murder.
We are not the most civilized. We are not the most just country. We just aren't. We know that there's a two-tier justice system. We see it all the time. It happens. There's actually a multi-tier justice system. Generally, if you're rich, you can get away with a lot. If you're African American, you're generally faced with harsher penalties from the law. We've seen this. It's well documented. They get shot at twice the rate as white people. They get arrested at 4 times the rate for marijuana use, even though it's the same. African American children are deemed threats at an earlier age. African American men and women are deemed to have super strength. This is well documented. So this is not the most just country in the world.
Case through the lens of politics. When you get to that point, haven't you?
Lots of cases become political just because of, part of how the news cycle is, and this is just in general, and part because of what they are. They have to have political consequences because of the impact that either the act had or the response to the act is. For example, in 2008, we would probably have a lot more political trials if more than one person went to fucking jail.
Already given up civilization?
Well, that's correct. And what we're really seeing...
Hold on, let's roll this back because that was wild.
Candace, we're happy to have her on tonight to assess what we're watching now. Candace Owens, you'd think in a country like ours, this is the most first world country that's ever been. You'd think the most civilized and the most just. Here you have to consider a murder case through the lens of politics. When you get to that point, haven't you already given up civilization?
Civilization is gone because there's a political angle to the Derek Chauvin trial. Civilization is over. Now, let's be clear. Fox didn't do a good job covering this, especially Tucker. Tucker over and over again said, we just don't know how he died. They won't tell us. And if you ask, they get mad at you and call you a racist because you refuse to answer the guy. You refuse to show the guy who said it. They had an EMT, or they had one of the guys who said exactly how he died because there's a quote that they use and they misuse it.
Well, that's correct. And what we're really seeing is mob justice. And that's really what happened with this entire...
Mob justice. Now, let's be clear what mob justice is. Mob justice was what could have happened on January 6th. That's what mob justice is. Mob justice could have been what happened when we watched them, the people who stormed the Capitol, barely get within feet of our lawmakers. If they'd found Mike Pence, they would have killed him. That's mob justice. What happened to Derek Chauvin was justice. He went through the system. They had a jury. They had evidence for and against. He had an attorney, and he was found guilty. This is not mob justice.
trial. This was not a trial about George Floyd or Derek Chauvin. This was a trial about whether the media was powerful enough to create a simulation and decide upon a narrative absent any facts. Whether it was powerful enough to repeat showing and talking about a 9-minute clip that came from somebody's cell phone without adding any context.
So everything she's going to say is demonstrably false. This was not the media didn't say this. We know he's guilty because we saw it. Police officers all over the country were like, no, this one is not okay. There is very rarely a backlash like this to something. This has nothing, the media didn't push this. So let's do some backstory. Candace Owens is, she did a video, it was like 18 minutes long, just going through George Floyd's history. And let's be very clear about this. George Floyd was not an angel. Nobody is arguing that he's an angel. But he shouldn't have died. And he shouldn't have died in the way he did. That is the difference. It's irrelevant what happened in his past. Because what happened and what Derek Chauvin is being tried for is what happened when he met George Floyd on this particular day.
Showing the full police video, which they could have released. They refused to release the full body cam, which would have.
So they actually did release this during the trial. That was one of the things that came out was during the trial. And it did make the difference because it wasn't relevant.
Added more clarity to the fact that the media was lying. The media came out. Let's not forget this, Tucker. The media came out and told us that this was a man who was just getting his life together. He was a good member of society, and he got mixed up because a racist white police officer had it out for him and killed him.
No, I don't think that was the narrative. So it's possible there were some people making that a narrative, but it's more a systemic narrative than it is a racist white narrative. This is a systemic issue of a certain group of people getting killed like this. And had he been white, Candace Owens would not be here talking about this. Because that's not what her role is for this network and for what she does and is paid for.
All of that fell apart. All of the facts came out and all of that fell apart. We now know, of course, that he had enough fentanyl in him. It was 3 times the lethal dosage, 3 times lethal dosage in him.
So this is what I was referring to. So they had an expert on, and apparently what he said is, had George Floyd died in his house, I would have said it was because of fentanyl. And the defense asked him about this, and he said, look, had that been the case, yes. However, that's not how that's not what happened. George Floyd met Derek Chauvin. Had George Floyd not met Derek Chauvin, he would still be alive.
When he died. But nobody cares because the media was successful in putting out a narrative and they kept hitting that narrative. And the reason why the Democrats are happy is because they realize, of course, the media supports them and now means the Democrats can get whatever they want because they can create a narrative and then they can treat.
This is not true for a whole plethora of reasons. I most recently just had a video called Centrists Just Want to Watch the World Burn. Democrats cannot get whatever they want. The media is generally tilted toward the right. That's how we ended up with a whole week worth of the Biden border crisis stuff. Generally, it is framed from a centrist and a Republican point of view. That is why we don't have incredibly popular positions or pieces of legislation like $15 minimum wage, like the removal of money in politics, like universal health care, things like that, like background checks, which have 97% approval. So no, the media is not biased toward Republicans or toward Democrats. They were against Trump because he was objectively awful. But the perfect counterexample is they rehabilitated George W. Bush, who is a war criminal.
People like pawns and get them to basically say, if we don't get what we want, we will riot, we will loot, we will send these people out like soldiers to destroy your neighborhoods. And that.
No. There would have been massive protest, and there was a good probability there would have been rioting and looting. That was not what was said. The reason for the protest would have been, and I can't stress this enough, the justice system would have said it is okay to murder people in cold blood who are not resisting because you can. And there's no accountability for that. That would have demanded protests. And yes, some of them would have turned into riots, whether it was because of the police, as a lot of them did, or because of outside agitators. And those are wrong, and they've been condemned.
That is exactly what has happened. That has been the determination of this trial. The media and the Democrats now have enough power to bully and to lie to and to create propaganda and to successfully win. And that is what happened. And they are celebrating.
That is not what happened. That is not what happens anyway. If we did that, there wouldn't be a filibuster.
That win today. This was not a fair trial.
Only one side.
No person can say this was a fair trial.
That's actually true. She's right on this point, but not for the reason she thinks. During the trial, it was said there's two separate things of evidence that were allowed. George Floyd's drug history was allowed as part of evidence, but Derek Chauvin's multiple complaints of excessive force and police brutality were not allowed. How is one of them relevant, but the other one isn't? This is actually similar to the Daniel Schaefer chase, where the officer who shot him had "get fucked" written on his rifle, and that wasn't allowed into evidence. So yeah, you're right, this wasn't a fair trial. It wasn't a fair trial because Derek Chauvin's history of doing these type of abuses was not allowed on trial.
You just got to take 3 steps back and acknowledge that only one side behaves this way. I mean, a jury in 1995 concluded that O.J. Simpson, despite DNA evidence, hadn't murdered 2 people and there were no riots. But more to the point,
But there were Rodney King riots. Those are different. It's different when you have that type of evidence. Look, the OJ thing is a very different case than this one is.
A lot of people sitting behind Trump voters sitting behind bars right now have been for months charged effectively with trespassing.
Hold on, let's roll this back because I want to go into this. This goes into one of my other Tucker videos.
To lie to and to create propaganda and to successfully win. And that is what happened. And they are celebrating that win today. This was not a fair trial.
Only one side.
No person can say this was a fair trial.
You just got to take 3 steps back and acknowledge that only one side behaves this way. I mean, a jury in 1995 concluded that O.J. Simpson, despite DNA evidence, hadn't murdered 2 people and there were no riots. But more to the point, there are a lot of people sitting behind Trump voters sitting behind bars right now have been for months charged effectively with trespassing. We're not speculating. We've seen the charges. No Republican in the Congress stands up for them.
So who is he referring to? He's referring to the January 6th insurrection. And any person who stood up for them, which there have been, because as one of the things you would see was recently the medical autopsy came back and somehow it was ruled that Brian Sicknick was killed by 2 strokes, and that had nothing to do with the insurrection. So every single right-winger was like, oh, well, now we know the only person killed was Ashley Babbitt, and she'll never get justice. And that's the difference. The people who were doing the insurrection also broke the law. And look, people are arrested for this, for the rioting and looting. It happens all the time.
Nobody mentions that. Nobody, is for prison reform when it's their political enemies. That's actually
not true because Democrats have been pushing for prison reform for a long time, and generally it's been blocked by Republicans. Also centrist Democrats, but that's irrelevant.
Equal justice, but nobody says it. Why is that?
Because we have 2 pandemics going on right now. There's a pandemic of ignorance in this country, and that is only allowed to fly because we also have a pandemic of cowardice in this country.
So one of those things are true, and the other one is kind of true. So yes, we do have a pandemic of ignorance. There's too many people, and this is part of the goal of this channel, who don't understand what is happening in politics. They don't understand what these decisions mean in their entirety. They don't understand what laws they're arguing. They only hear the spin. They don't understand things. So we do have an ignorance, and is both designed and unintentional. What Tucker Carlson does is a designed ignorance. He treats his audience as idiots, and he has argued by law that the things he says cannot be believed by a rational person.
Okay, so we have people that are purposefully putting out a bunch of ignorant claims, and then we have people that are too
one of which is her. And this guy, that's literally part of their job.
Cowardly to stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong. There has been so much that has been going on in this country that is wrong. You talk about it, I talk about it, but we do not have people that are sitting in Congress that are willing to take this fight.
So that's not necessarily true. You do have people in Congress who are willing to back the things that they say. The problem is the American people don't agree because they're fucking crazy.
it needs to be taken. By the way, you bring up Maxine Waters inciting violence. I'm so old, Tucker, that I remember when a man said march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, and that was considered an incite to violence, right? That was like...
No. This is a long-standing argument that Donald Trump didn't say go be violent, and therefore the insurrection wasn't his fault, because they're ignoring all the lead up to the things that he said. And I have a video on the Maxine Waters stuff, and I'll link it in the video below. But she's wrong about this. She's equating the wrong things.
Oh my God, stop the press. Get this person disappeared from social media because he is calling for violence. Look at what Maxine...
He was calling for violence over and over and over again.
Waters says no one in the media is condemning these remarks. That same media that condemned Trump and his supporters for weeks on end is now defending Maxine Waters. And we both know this is not the first time that Maxine Waters has incited violence. Don't forget, rush down. If you see a Trump supporter, you got to rush them down in the restaurants. They're allowed to do this. They play by a different set of rules, but it's because we allow them to play with that different set of rules. They get away with virtually everything because we don't have strong people on our side that are willing to stand up.
Keep in mind, if you look into the number of people who are arrested by political party, it is overwhelmingly Republican.
No, and that it's a sad conclusion. It really is so frustrating. And the idea of martyring George Floyd.
This is the other thing this is her other thing, is every single black person who's killed is now a martyr. No, nobody's arguing that George Floyd is a martyr. Well, actually, that's not true. Nancy Pelosi said some really, really dumb shit that I'm going to cover in a little. But that's not what this is about.
Nancy Pelosi spoke about him. It completely forgives all of the trauma that he brought against his victims while he was alive. You know, a man that served 7+ stints in prison while he was alive, armed robbery being 2 of the reasons why. And now we're going to martyr him and say that your name will forever be synonymous with justice. Imagine, Tucker, if you are one of his victims that is alive, one of his victims that he armed robbed, and you have...
George Floyd's past is irrelevant to what happened here. It does not matter what George Floyd's past was because it had no influence on what happened on that day. That's the difference. You can't conflate these things because they're not conflatable.
Hear that this man's name will always be synonymous with justice. How would that feel to you? I feel like we are living in fiction right now in America. We are losing this country and we are living in...
Losing this country because a cop who murdered a guy, which we have 9 minutes of watching it happen, got arrested and paid for it. But this country is lost now.
Because people are not strong enough to call out this stuff. And I feel like I'm one of the only ones who has the courage to say I will not be mobbed into a different reality.
This is where they try and pull you off the internet because you're not afraid. I just got to ask you, it's frustrating, of course, to watch what you and I have been talking about, where one side ferociously defends its power, the other side abandons its voters to jail. I wonder, though, is there a point where just ordinary people can say, you know, I'm not in control of politics, but you're not allowed to block my street with a protest or intimidate?
That's not true. That is not true. You're illegally allowed to block a street with a protest. That's part of the First Amendment. Unless you're in Florida, where now they're allowed to run you the fuck over. So what he's advocating for is killing protesters doing their First Amendment. Shocking. Tucker Carlson's anti-First Amendment.
Me on my front lawn or break into my store and steal stuff. Like, I'm going to defend my family. I'm going to defend my business. You don't have a right to do that. There's no justification for riots anymore.
No and no. Look, nobody is saying you're not allowed to defend your store. And people have said the riots are bad. You're allowed to defend your family. Nobody's arguing that. But yes, there's still justifications for protest because things haven't changed. There was another person killed by the police as this verdict came down. Now, whether or not that one is acceptable, I'm waiting for more evidence because it looks like the officer was in the right to kill her. However, there might also be other cases where officers have reacted differently to stop the same thing without using lethal force. So that's something I'm going to have to look into as more information comes out about that one. But no, there is still things to be protesting about. The problem is not solved.
Just not going to put up with it.
No.
Will we
and
get to
that's
that point, do you think?
No, we're not going to. That's why they're already moving the ball. They're already moving it. They're moving the goalpost already because they're saying right now that that's not enough. That wasn't justice, by the way, because what they're saying is what they want is a perpetual revolution. It's why they want people to be ignorant. It's why they want people in the education system to learn nothing but race and how to...
No, this is actually not exactly what they're saying. They're saying we want a revolution in policing. We want reform. And this idea that she's going to go into critical race theory. I'll probably have to look at that in another live stream. Because the only people who want ignorance are Republicans. That's why they constantly defund schools.
Be angry. You want people acting like toddlers, because when people are ignorant, they act like toddlers. They whine, they complain, they cry because they are absent facts. They are absent knowledge. So we are actually seeing a systemic oppression that is taking place that is rotten. It is throughout the propaganda that's taking place in the mainstream media, and it is working with the education institutions, teaching critical race theory and all of this nonsense.
All right, we're done here. This is going to be split into two videos. So, look. There's a lot going on here, and this is just going to be the ending for the two videos. The fact that Greg Gutfield's response was, look, I'm just happy that they found him guilty, even though, we had to sacrifice this guy to save the country, was so bad that Fox viewers on The Five were like, come on, man, you can't be doing that. That's too much. And then you have Tucker and Candace going on, spewing just nonsense. Look, George Floyd was not an angel. Unfortunately, his name is synonymous with the Black Lives Matter and with Derek Chauvin and with some type of justice being get. The problem is nobody wants to be synonymous with that type of justice because he fucking died before it happened. So look, Tucker is losing it more and more. He's going further and further into his white identity politics. And Candace is there to push the narrative that African Americans, it is their fault. That's what she does. And that it's actually the Democrats who are the racists. So look, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Please follow me on Twitter, and I will see you in the next one.